Hi, I'm Kristen and this is Scrap Fabric Love, and today I'm going to share with you the join and flip quilt-as-you-go method. This has got to be the easiest way to do quilt-as-you-go, to my mind anyway, because there's no sashing, no strips, no hand sewing. So it's a way for you to be able to make bigger quilts on your domestic machine, and it doesn't have all the faff of some of the other methods that I've researched. I've been through loads. I've done previous videos where there was like 7 different methods that I tried to adapt with no hand sewing. And then a couple of years ago, I found this method. It didn't actually have a name, so I'm calling it the join and flip method because I think that's descriptive. Now, I didn't invent it, but I've kind of adapted it to use it myself. And I've used it loads since that original video. And I've also had subscribers and viewers on YouTube give me sort of ways to adapt it and ideas, which I've also tried. So this is the updated, shortened version of this method. I'm going to show you how easy it is and the different ways that you can adapt it for what you're trying to do. So I hope it's going to help you make these bigger quilts that I think you're probably wanting to make. Okay, let's get started. So lots of different quilt-as-you-go methods solve different problems. This method is going to be for you if you don't want to do any hand sewing, you don't want to use sashing to join your blocks of rows, and you don't want to have to roll up or bunch your quilt under the throat space of your machine. So in this video, I'm going to show you the basic joining method, how you can adapt that for individually quilted blocks, and then I'm going to show you a whole quilt example using kind of a variation that one of my subscribers sent in to me. Okay, so to do the basic joining technique with any rows, so this is our rows here. It's only 2 blocks wide, this row, for the sake of an example, but this could be longer, okay? So I've got my 2 rows. So let's say I wanted them like this, right? So this would be row 1 and row 2, and then I've got 2 pieces of batting, which are the same size as the rows, and here they are, two pieces of batting, and then 2 pieces of backing, the same size as the rows. So here is how we have to make our sandwich to make this join and flip quilt as you go. And again, you would do this the same if it was longer rows. So you put your 2 pretty sides, your 2 right sides, your quilt top rows, right sides together, and then I will grab a clip, hang on, for where I want it to join, here in the middle. Okay, then I've got my 2 pieces of batting, so that I'm going to put 1 here and then 1 underneath, so here. So it's basically, you've got your batting and your quilt top are together the same way it would be if you were gonna, so if you join them, they'd be like this, do you see? So that's kind of as you would expect, and there are other quilt-as-you-go methods where you would have this, your quilt top rows and your batting, and they're just right sides together like that. The difference here is the backing fabric. So we're gonna put the backing fabric right sides together, like that. And then that's gonna go, that little pile of backing is gonna go at the very bottom here, okay? And then we're going to, then I can move my clip and clip through the whole thing. And then what I'm gonna do is stitch, once I've straightened this up at the machine, stitch a 1/4 inch all the way down here. Okay, so I've got my stack, and I'm just making sure it's all lined up properly. You can pin this if you want to, obviously, because I've cut everything exactly the same size. I just want to make sure it's all properly lining up before I sew. When I did this previously, so the video a couple years ago, I cut the backing and the batting a little bit bigger. I was still lining up this edge here, but everything else was just a tiny smidgen bigger so that I could trim it down at the end if I got things a bit off. So if that's something you're worried about, you're not precise, because usually I'm not at all, you can just cut these a little bit bigger and then take the time to trim it down at the end. So, okay. And if there's any places in your blocks where they need to join up, you would want to pin or clip the same way you would if you were just joining the rows with no batting no backing. It's the same thing, okay? I have a built-in, it's called like an IDT in my faff, so that's the equivalent of my walking foot. If you don't have that, you'd want to put your walking foot on for this because it's just quite a few layers. And then all we're doing is a simple 1/4 inch seam. Apologies for the shaking camera here, but basically all I'm doing is sewing down with a straight stitch. In the video of a couple of years ago, I was going on and on about whether or not this seam was thick. I really don't think it is, but I have had people tell me that they would do things like trim the batting at this point, like trim it down in the seam, things like that, if that's something you're concerned about. But I've found you can hardly really notice it. So what I'm going to do now, so this, you can see there's my block joined in the front there. And what I'm going to do is now open up the back. So I'm flipping open one back. So there's my back joined. You can see there's nothing we need to hand stitch shut or anything like that. Then you open the front and there we go. So we're joined, our rows are joined front and back. So I would at this point press this a bit to flatten it because you can see there is the seam if you're worried about the bulk there. But I've also got another modification to this if this is not something you want to do, if you don't want to sew through all 4 layers. But this is the method I would normally use. If this is row 1 and 2 of a quilt that's got 5, 6, 7 rows, whatever, then you have a choice about quilting. So obviously the benefit of this is that you could, for example, quilt this row first, then do this joining method we've just done, then quilt this row, then join a third one, then again. And so then the whole quilt should be, so you're starting here, you're quilting 1 row, then you do your little joining that we just did. And then you can move row 1 over here, so beyond to the left of your needle, and you're quilting row 2. So let's say you're doing straight lines like that, okay? And then you would join the 3rd row, and then you can, so yes, the quilt is still getting heavier and bigger, but it's all getting heavier and bigger this way. Nothing ever has to be rolled up here. So that's the genius of this. That is why I got drawn to it so much, was that you didn't have to squish anything through here. Now, that works if you're doing something, you know, straight this way, you know, wavy lines, straight lines, something relatively simple. If you want to do something a bit more intricate with your quilting, there's another way we can work this. So I will show you that next. Okay, so use case number 2. If you want to quilt your blocks individually, which is a way a lot of people do quilt as you go, because they like to do free motion quilting and it's easier with 1 block than it is with a whole quilt. You can still do that with this method. So these are 4 blocks that I've done with the batting, but no backing. I didn't do free motion, but I did take the liberty of using different thread colors for each one, which obviously is harder to do if you're doing a whole quilt. So that's kind of something fun you can do with Quilt As You Go. Anyway, so I've got my 4 blocks. So what I want to do is make them into rows. So again, this is 4 just for the sake of giving you an example, right? But it could be 10 blocks per row or 5, or depending what size quilt you're making, right? So I'm going to join my rows right sides together just as they are. And then we're just doing the same joining method with a backing piece that is the length of each row. So let me just join these and come back and I'll show you. So here they are, they're joined into rows. I've done it with the batting and I've ironed it open. So I use this method a lot. I don't find that it makes things too bulky. It's all right. But again, some folk will do this method, but they will have quilted it with the batting 1/4 inch shorter all the way around so that you just have the fabric that you're joining. That's another option. And I'm going to show you one more way to do this whole Quilt As You Go joining method with smaller batting in a minute. But let's just stick with this one for now. So you've wanted to quilt all your blocks separately, and now you want to join them without any sashing or hand piecing or any of that. So it's exactly the same as we did before. So we get 2 pieces of backing fabric to go with this because we already have our quilt top and our batting, they're already there. Here is 2 pieces of backing fabric. These are actually a tiny bit bigger than I need, I think. Yeah, they are, but it's fine. So all we got to, even if it's a tiny bit bigger, all you have to do is line it up to, so this is the bit that can't protrude. You want that to be straight up against it, because this is where we're going to put our 1/4 inch seam. And then here's my second backing piece. So I'm going to put this stack right sides together. So the two backing pieces are right sides together, just like last time. Okay, and I'm going to line that up just to make sure that this line everything's all lined up there. And then I'm going to put my second one right side down. And then I would put a little clip to make sure these two bits, to make sure that I'm sewing these points where I want the blocks to meet in the right place. Just like if you were just joining rows generally, and then you might need to straighten some things up again. Right. Okay, so now I'm going to take that to the machine and I'm going to sew my 1/4 inch seam along here like we did last time. Okay, so there it is. I've sewn that seam. I've sewn through all the layers, right? And so then what I'm going to do is flip this backing piece this way and this top piece this way. And there we go. I've got a quilt with a front and a back, right? So this is why I like this. So I would still press this, and sometimes, but not always, depending on your quilting design, I might do like a top stitch or a stitch in the ditch down here, but it's not strictly necessary. So let me press this and I'll show you. So there we go. I've pressed this seam here, trimmed off the excess backing because I cut that backing a little bit big. And there we go. So I've got what would be a quilt, top and back with our two sections so you can see. And again, if you were joining multiple rows on this and it's wider quilt and everything, you never have to have this rolled up under the throat of your machine. That's the key point. So at this point, I want to tell you about some of the benefits of this method and sort of cool things you can do with it, and also the reason why you might sometimes choose to quilt the blocks first and join it this way as opposed to this way where I haven't quilted this yet. Okay, so let me show you this as an example again. So when I started with this method for the first time, I was doing something more like a log cabin. So something this size would have been like the center, and then I added another strip here and here, because you can go in any direction with this as long as you're adding the backing at the right time. That's the only bit about this that can get complicated. But so I'll show you an example of that one on the screen, that quilt. And there's another video where you can watch me making that if you're like, I don't know what you're talking about. But the reason I show you that one is because what I did there was quilt section 1 or row 1, however you want to call it, first. Then I joined this one, and then I quilted this one. And then I added another one, joined it, quilted, joined it, quilted. And you can absolutely do that, and that's fine, as long as the quilting you're doing in the row is not super, super dense, especially the first one, because you know how quilting can kind of alter the size of things and kind of scrunch it up a bit. So if you were doing something super dense in this row, and this is quilted and this isn't, then you're joining two things that are not exactly the same size. If all you're doing is a couple wavy lines or some straight line quilting, it should be fine. And if your blocks aren't too intricate. So then you can just do, I'm gonna quilt one, join one, quilt one, join one with simple quilting. But if you want to do something more, obviously this wasn't quilted in rows, it's quilted in blocks. But if you want to do something that's denser, like super matchstick quilting or free motion quilting, where it's just quilted to death, like some people love to do, which I love to do sometimes, then if I did that with row 1 first and then joined it to row 2 might not totally match where I wanted it to, especially if there was lots of joining bits between the blocks, if that makes sense. So this actually is the method I use more often, because I like to do things like piece as you go, but sort of the kind of quilt as you go where you're adding bits with the batting while you're making it. And then I would join it, the rows and the backing, using this method. So that would probably be my favorite, but this is a super quick, fun way to do something that doesn't need as dense quilting. So it depends what style of quilt you want to make, okay? My double orange peel quilt videos show me using this method with individually quilted blocks and then joining the rows with this joining method. So you can check those out if you want to see a whole quilt made that way. Next, I'm going to show you a whole quilt example with some simpler patchwork blocks, and it's using a method that a subscriber suggested with cutting the batting a little bit smaller. Okay, so this is a whole quilt example I'm going to show you, right? So this is, I don't know if you can see them all on here. Can I make this bigger? There we go, my messy table. But anyway, so I've got 8 rows of 12 5-inch squares. So this is just like your basic patchwork quilt. So there's no piecing or whatever, but it would be the same if it was. And they could be bigger blocks. They don't have to be this small. This is just what I'm making this for a friend. It's like a toddler quilt. So I'll just show you. So I've got those. So that's my quilt top, my rows, and they're all separate. Then I've got 8 strips of backing fabric, and they don't have to be the same, which is another lovely thing. So you don't have to have one great big piece of backing fabric. You can just have whatever strips you've got, and of course you could even piece the strips, which I think happened here. So I've got 8. They are also 5-inch wide these might be a little longer than the rows. I can trim them at the end, but anyway, same size as the rows essentially is what we're looking for there. And then I've got 8 strips of batting here. Again, just because of the size I'm making, it doesn't always have to be 8. But I've cut these to 4.5. I actually used my 4.5-inch strip die on my AccuQuilt, which made it even easier. And these are leftover bits of batting that, I trimmed off the side of other quilts and things. So I'm able to use up more bits of batting using this method as well, which is another bonus. So it's 4.5 inches, so that what I'm going to do is use that joining method that we just used with the other 2 examples, but without the batting. And then we're going to slip the batting in after, and then quilt, and then join the next row. So this is one of the suggestions I got from a subscriber who was watching the examples before. Okay, so I'm just making that same sandwich. So it's the 2 rows are right sides to right sides, and the 2 backings are right sides to right sides, but I haven't yet added the batting. So this is kind of the alternative if you don't want to sew through all of those layers, if you do think the seam is too bulky or you just don't like sewing through all of that. So I've done it on the table here for the first 2 rows. All I'm doing now is slipping in that narrower batting. So it's cut at 4.5, and I'm just kind of popping it underneath the seam a little bit there. Some other people did suggest a couple of variations again on this. So one was to actually zigzag the batting to the seam. I thought that was a step too far for me. And then another one was to use fusible batting here, so you don't have to use the pins. So that's another idea. Anyway, all I was doing for this one was some really simple quilting. So I was just stitching either side of the ditch to make sure I've got the batting there. It's within the range of the space you can leave batting unquilted, so that's totally fine for the batting I was using. And then I'm just continuing on adding the next quilt top row, right sides to right sides, and the backing underneath, then flipping it open like we were doing, and then sliding the batting in when I'm ready, and then doing that quilting line either side of the ditch. Now, I know this is sped up, it really sped up, because I just wanted to show you this variation, and I wanted to show you me making a whole quilt so you could see how the quilt top just kind of extends along to the left. If you want to see this example slower, just click the cog in the settings, and you can slow this all the way down, and obviously turn my voice off because it'll go really slow if you do that. But the key thing I wanted to show you with this is whether or not you're slipping the batting in like I'm trying here, or you've already got the batting included. What is going to happen as your not just your quilt top, as your quilt grows, is that it's going to grow to the left. So the only thing you need to do to make sure you don't have that strain in your shoulders and you're not having to carry the whole weight of the quilt is to get something up on the left side of your needle to support the quilt. So I've got this fancy horn sewing cabinet, so I can use that. But if you don't, you just get another table and butt it up against the left side of your sewing table, and then all the weight can go on there, and all you have to do is focus on the one row you're joining, the one row you're quilting, and this is the problem that it solves for me. So when I want to do quilt as you go, this is what I want. I want a method where I'm not having to roll anything up while I'm quilting or while I'm joining, and it can just get bigger and bigger and bigger in one direction. So that is why I wanted to show you this. So whether you want to use the smaller batting or not, that's just another option to try, because I think this quilt as you go method is really, really versatile. You can change it up for what you want. You can use it for quilts with rows with different widths. You know, all these rows are the same width as each other, but they don't have to be. You know, it's just a joining method, so you can use it however you want. And if you would like to explore other ways of using this method in a fun way, I'm going to be soon releasing a date for Quilt as you go crazy quilt workshop, which I'm doing live on Zoom. So that's just another fun thing to try. You can join the waiting list in a link in the description. And if you're watching way in the future, check out the link in the description. There might be a recorded version. I'm not sure. So here is the front and back of that quilt. Not bound yet, but you can kind of see how it turned out there. So I hope you're going to give this method a try, and I hope you love it as much as I do. Do let me know in the comments if you tried it and how it went. If you are new to the channel, thanks so much for watching. I make scrap quilts on YouTube, and I do lots of sort of quilt as you go projects as well. So if you haven't subscribed, I hope you'll consider it, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks so much for spending time with me. Bye.